Okay, so hi folks, and welcome to the very first session of the extreme climbing virtual expeditions, where our endeavor is that at least once, if not twice a month, we'll try showcasing some of the mountains that we've climbed as an opportunity to share our experience with the extreme community of Adventure Pearls. For those of you who can't attend the session live, we will also try creating a recording of it to showcase on the WhatsApp group so that you don't miss out on any information. For the very first session, what we're going to be doing is we are going to be sharing with you our experience on climbing the highest mountain of South America, which is Aconcagua. Aconcagua is located in the central Andes mountain, and it is was a fantastic experience for us to be able to not just travel to South America and visit Argentina, but also climb in another part of the world. Um, this is not a detailed information, but just an overview of what our experience was like on climbing Argentina. Once I have a chance to share the expedition with you, we'll open it up for questions if anybody has towards the end of the session. The first and biggest challenge, of course, was getting to Aconcagua. And honestly, for the longest time, I personally had no idea where Aconcagua was located. How do you get there? Which country, which part of South America it was? I think to a large extent on this particular expedition, Soraj ended up taking a major lead on the entire expedition planning. Because this was our first expedition, we ended up going as climbers and not as organizers to South America. And so it was very important for us to be able to identify and assess who was the logistical partner who was going to give us support and give us the kind of confidence and trust in being able to reach the summit. But more importantly, be safe on this particular mountain. So the first idea was to do a quick assessment of what Aconcagua was all about. Um, I think first and foremost, it was important to know what the height was. And at 6,962 meters, I think Suraj and I were very confident about our ability to attain this height. This, of course, is the biggest question that any climber has because every time you go back to the mountains, either you're hoping to be able to tag the same altitude, if not go higher. Having climbed Everest in 2018 and gone all the way up to 8848 meters, one would presume that we are very comfortable now with any height. But I think we've climbed enough mountains to be sufficiently aware and, of course, respectful of any mountain that is above 6,000 meters, never to underestimate the height of this particular mountain. I think the other aspect of it was that it's also located in another mountain range, the Andes mountain range. So just to give you a perspective, the Andes mountain range is actually the longest mountain range in the world. It is even longer than the Himalayas. In fact, it runs right from the top of South America all the way down to the tip of South America. And so becomes the longest mountain range in the world. Aconcagua is located right in the center of the central Andes Mountains. And so the access point to Aconcagua is actually Argentina, specifically Mendoza. So our entire aim was to try figuring out how do we get all the way from India to Mendoza. So after all the research we did, we realized that you can, of course, go through the Europe countries and the connection. The other was the Middle East. But Suraj and I actually stumbled on a very good and convenient connection, which was through Africa. So we flew from Bombay to Addis Ababa, which is the capital of Ethiopia. And then from Addis Ababa, we then did a long 16-hour flight all the way to South America. Your touch point can either be Buenos Aires, which is the capital of Argentina, or you can even fly up to Sao Paulo, which is in Brazil. And from Sao Paulo, there's a direct flight that goes to Mendoza. This expedition took us about 20 days. And the difficulty. Now, again, this is a very generic classification of the difficulty of the mountain. But we ended up underestimating the mountain, thinking, okay, 6,900 meters, we've been there before. But I would definitely say that this mountain is difficult, and I will obviously talk about this a little bit more later on. The accommodation is a combination of hotels in the city and, of course, tents throughout the expedition. Up to base camp, they're really comfortable tents, but higher up, then you end up staying in more dorm kind of tents rather than individual tents. The great thing about this mountain is that it actually has two distinct climbing routes. So the first climbing route is the north section, and it's a little bit more gradual. This is through the Vacas Valley, and you end up climbing through the Plaza Argentina, going up to Guanacos, Cholera Camp, and then climbing up. But Soraj and I like to do things difficult, so we decided to take the steeper route of trekking up to Plaza de Mulas in 2 days, and then, of course, climbing up Camp Canada, Camp Condo, Berlin, Independencia, and going straight up and then tagging the North Summit. Now, there's a height difference between the North Summit and the South Summit. Rather than look at climbing both, we ended up just going and doing the North Summit, which is 6,962 meters. From a distance, though, the South Summit actually looks higher and looks much more impressive because it has a higher snow dump on it. But the true summit of Aconcagua is actually the North Summit, as I said, at 6,962 meters. The biggest challenge of this mountain, honestly, were twofold. One is the rapid height gain that is associated with this mountain. And I think the second big challenge of it is the vegetation that is there. It is a very dry, very arid vegetation. In fact, if you look at the profile of the altitude, so on this graph, I've actually drawn out on the vertical axis the height, and of course, on the horizontal axis, the distance. So from Mendoza, of course, to the entrance of the national park is a drive. But that's the interesting thing, all the way from Mendoza to the national park, you're already gaining about 2,000 meters. So your trek literally starts at about 3,000 meters. From 3,000 meters, we start trekking. And that night at Confluencia campsite, we're already sleeping at about 3,400 meters. We try to spend an extra day over here to acclimatize because the walk from Confluencia all the way to the base camp, and the base camp of here is called Plaza de Mulas, has these very Spanish exotic names of sorts. So it took us a little while to get familiar with the pronunciation of each campsite. But it's a decent height gain. I mean, if you actually look at it, it's almost 1,000 meters. And the distance that you end up covering is quite a bit. So you actually end up covering from about 20 to 25 kilometers in a single day walking from Confluencia to Plaza de Mulas. Big height jump, big distances covered. So by the time you actually get into base camp of Aconcagua, it's a very long day and quite tiring. But the biggest advantage is that we end up climbing Aconcagua in the month of December, January. So though it's winter over here in the northern hemisphere, in the southern hemisphere, it's actually summer. And so sunset only happens by about 8:30, 8:45 in the evening. So the days are longer, you have more daylight to operate in, and it becomes an interesting experience per se. From there, we end up spending a couple of days at the base camp before we start the final push towards the summit. As you can see, there are big height jumps. So from the base camp to Canada, it's 4,950 meters, which is another 600 meters. Then we climb up higher to Camp 2, which again is another 400-meter height gain. Then we go up to the high camp, which is the Camp Cholera, which is 5,800 meters. And finally, from Camp Cholera all the way to the summit is a good 1,100, 1,200 meter push through the night. We tag the summit and come all the way back down to Camp Cholera. So twofold challenge. One is, of course, big height jumps on this. And the second is that it's very arid. I mean, Suraj and I have climbed in Leh Ladakh, and that's probably the terrain that we would compare it to. very dry, very arid. I think above 3,400 meters above Camp Confluencia, which you can see over here. There's just no vegetation at all. It's quite intense and extreme. I actually got this really nice climbing route profile that gives you a clear perspective of what the entire climb looks like. This is a virtual 3D rendition of what the expedition looks like. It- It's great to say that you made it in 2 minutes, but yeah, it obviously takes a lot longer than doing the climb. So let me share our experience. So we ended up going with a team from Mendoza, Aconcagua Mountain Guides. We evaluated them in comparison to some of the other expedition teams and felt that they had the right qualifications to support us in our endeavor. We were actually supposed to join a bigger team, but unfortunately, closer to the date, I think there were some date changes. And so it ended up being just three climbers, Soraj, myself, and a Japanese climber called Masaki Ikeda. It's interesting because when we were climbing Everest as well, even at that time, we had a Japanese climber joining us. And from our personal experience, I think both climbers, whether it's because they're from Japan or not, but I mean, we had so much of fun and we really got along very well. We had one guide, Mr. Ruben, who veteran climber of Aconcagua, has been climbing in this mountain for the last 15 years and specializes as an Aconcagua mountain guide. That's it. It was just the four of us. So we landed in Mendoza. We had an orientation session at the hotel, and the next morning is when we ended up driving all the way to the entrance of the national park. We spent a night at the entrance of the national park. It's called Penitentes, and this is interesting because at 3,000 meters, which is the entrance of the national park, the temperature was already cold, much colder than Mendoza. I think the first night itself, the temperatures dropped to 0 degrees. And immediately we were thinking, oh shit, we were not expecting it to be so cold, and we haven't even started the climb as such. But That's interesting because during the day, the heat can get very intense. So it is very important, unlike most of our other mountains, where usually you will see me in a t-shirt walking around with a hat. Over here, I was as cautious as oranges against the sun. I made sure I was completely fully covered, sunglasses, sunblock, and even wearing a buff at all times because it's very dry and very arid. We ended up trekking the first day and going all the way to Confluencia. And on the second day, we acclimatized a little bit, and on day three, pushed on and reached the base camp. The terrain changes very dramatically. So if you look at the leftmost picture, you can see this beautiful scene, which has now become iconic as far as any Google search images of Aconcagua is. You can see Aconcagua in the center of the frame, the lovely lake and green vegetation. But this is just at the entrance. The central picture shows me, of course, looking out at Aconcagua. And slowly and steadily, you can see how the vegetation is changing dramatically. And the third picture that you see is actually a sunrise over the Confluencia campsite, which is the first campsite that we have. It's very structured, very organized. As you can see, the dome shaped tents are where we have dining, and it's more like a lounge area of sorts. But the campsite and the facilities are really good, especially because teams have fixed camps over here, which end up staying there for a good 2.5 to 3 months. When we reached the base camp of Aconcagua, it was great to have an acclimatization day, not just in the campsite, but also there was another acclimatization day built up to a nearby peak called Mount Bonete. It just so happened that it was at 5,100 meters. And also, this took place on the 11th of December. So it was the first time in my life that I got a chance to actually climb a mountain on the 11th of December. Usually during this time, we stay away from the mountains. So for me, it was a very novel experience of sorts. It was also great because it helped build up a lot of confidence. And also for Mount Bonete, you get a better bird's eye perspective of Aconcagua because this mountain is slightly away from the main peak we were climbing, and so gives you an interesting perspective of reaching the top of the mountain. This is where it gets very interesting because unlike most other mountains where you have donkeys that are carrying stuff up, you physically have to carry a load. So the things that we end up carrying to the higher mountains are, of course, our climbing equipment, some amount of food that we need, and also our personal gear. So totally on an average, a climber needs to be strong enough to be able to carry anywhere from 15 to 20 kgs. In case you're not able to carry that much of weight, you can hire porter services where you can either ask them to carry, 10 kgs of your load or 20 kgs of your load. But you must remember that unlike, India, where human labor is not so expensive in the rest of the world, whether it's Europe, whether it's North America, South America, this becomes a huge expense that you have to incur and therefore budget for. We ended up going to Canada, which is Camp 1, and coming back down and resting at base camp. Every time you come back to the base camp, it's interesting to know that they're very strict about your medical acclimatization. And so the regular medical checks happen, and you have to pass them. If you don't pass them, then they give you another day to acclimatize and again do another medical check. And if you're still not able to acclimatize, then the national park is well in its right to refuse you permission to go higher up on the camp. From base camp, we pushed again to Camp 1, and then from Camp 1 went to Camp 2. From Camp 2, we spent another day, went up to Camp 3, and then all the way to the summit. I think the biggest challenge of the summit day is the fact that it's a very long push and height gain. You don't even realize it, but it's very dry, very arid. And you don't wear trekking boots, you have to wear climbing boots because the cold temperatures can be very extreme. I still remember there was the part to this traverse of the North Face where we were going through, where you go through the Canaleta Gully. At this point in time, the winds picked up very fast, and the winds were so cold that the breath from us breathing, it started freezing and condensing on our eyelashes. And there was this point in time where Soresh turned to me and he couldn't close his eyes because his eyelashes had literally frozen together. It was that extreme. I think the other challenge of this climb was that we are used to climbing in the night, and so we end up moving much faster. But during the day, because a lot of the climbing happens during the day, and we only reach the summit at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So, because a lot of the climbing happens during the day, the sun is beating down on you, so you're feeling cold, but you're also getting dehydrated at the same time. So, it's very critically essential to be able to drink water. Um, I think it was just that one day where Suraj and I ended up not putting sunblock because it kind of froze, and so because of that one day of not putting sunblock, even today both of us still have like sunburn and scars on our face, which we're hoping to get rid of. Multiple challenges on summit day. As I said, you're wearing big climbing boots. The terrain is very, very rocky. You're climbing during the day, which is in the sun, and the entire ecosystem is extremely dry and arid. So, from all these pictures, the two takeaways that you can see very clearly is that there's no vegetation. It's very rocky, some amount of ice. We were very lucky. The teams after us had a lot more snow and ice. And more importantly, very, very windy and cold conditions. One of the windiest and coldest conditions that we have seen on a mountain ever from all our years of climbing mountains. I think that is one important takeaway from this entire expedition. Of course, 18th it proves to be a very, very auspicious day for us. We summited Everest on the 18th of May, 2020, sorry, 2018. And now in 2024, on the 18th of December, we were very lucky, both of us, to be able to reach the summit at the same time and not only just raise the India flag, but also carry the Adventure Pulse banner to the top of yet another continent. So with this, I think Suraj and I have together been able to climb four of the seven summits that exist in the world. Usually what happens is most people only talk about reaching the top, but it's very important to remember that when you do reach the top of the mountain, you are only halfway through the expedition. You have to come back down. And the descent down from the summit to Camp 3 for me personally was very tiring and exhausting because I was very badly dehydrated. I still remember coming down to Camp 3 and lying down with my climbing boots and just falling asleep. I didn't even have enough energy to go and have dinner that evening. But but I was able to rest and recover. And the next day, of course, carry all that 20 kgs and come from Camp 3 down to base camp. The next day, you go from base camp all the way to the entrance park, which is a good 34, 35 kilometers that we cover in a single day. So it is super important to be strong enough also to be able to make the trip back down from the mountain, because otherwise the alternative is that you exhaust yourself and you have to then take a helicopter evacuation, which, trust me, is not the cheapest thing in this part of the world. Giving you a small little synopsis on the accommodation, we have dome-shaped tents, very comfortable, one of the most comfortable campsites that we've had a chance to be part of. This is both at camp, at the Confluencia campsite and also at base camp. The picture that you see on the left, which are the dome-shaped tents, you'll see a little ice over here, and above that is the main mountain. So above this camp is where we end up staying in dome-shaped tents where 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 climbers can stay together. Helps you protect against the wind as well. All the layers, I mean, all the possible layers that you're carrying with you are important to have. So thermals, t-shirts, fleece jackets, down jackets, very important to have a waterproof outer. In this particular mountain, I think the extremities protecting them are very important. So woolen caps, beanies, buff, face mask if possible, fleece gloves and insulated gloves. Climbing gear, climbing boots are critical. This has to be 7,000-meter climbing boots. Gaiters, sometimes your boots have inbuilt gaiters, but if you don't have that, it's very important to have. Crampons are a must. Good to have a climbing harness, not necessary, but snow goggles, trekking pole, and climate helmet again are must because it's very easy to have rock fall on this particular mountain. Jumars are optional, but it's good to have carabiners as well. And this last item, the pee bottle, I made a mistake by not carrying it, but I really wish I had because in the middle of the night when you have to go out, the winds are too strong, and it's better to use a pee bottle inside the tent than outside the tent. Of course, there are different ways of trying to accommodate that. But all in all, that was our experience on Aconcagua. In fact, since sometimes pictures can't do justice, I've also got a small little video that I've put together of pictures. It's not fancy. It's something that I've personally done, and so I've used a free version. So sorry for the watermark that is there. But here, I'm just going to play the video for you. And of course, then after that, we can open it up to questions. Okay. Okay. Can you guys see the video?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
It's not yet started playing, Sam, I think. At least I can see it. I can just like see a gray screen actually playing for me.
Okay, you can't see the video?
No,
Yeah, I
not yet.
can't. No, I can't.
Okay, okay. Let me try again. Mm, Videos. Okay. So with that, we come to an end of the Aconcagua session. The idea is to just give you small bits of information, just an orientation of what the climb is. And of course, if any of you are excited about this mountain, want more information about this mountain, Suraj and I are always happy to share our experience and talk about it more. Aconcagua is a mountain that I think is something that is great to climb, fabulous as far as aspiration is concerned, but you definitely need to be very strong and fit for it. We're hoping to be able to put a team together again this December of 2025 to go back to South America and climb it. But yeah, I definitely think it's important for any climbing team aspiring to climb Aconcagua to really invest in their fitness regime per se. With that, we come to an end of the session, and I think we have got like less than a minute on the clock as well. But if you have any questions, if you have any comments, please feel free to use the WhatsApp community group that we have. And Suraj and I will be happy to answer questions on the group as well. That way, we involve other people who couldn't join us for this call, and we will edit this session and put it together and share the recording as well on the WhatsApp group. So, yeah, thanks everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.